we have to recognize that as long as the Netanyahu government is in power, there's no chance of talking about a two-state solution or peace.
Now, Hamas has proposed a three-stage ceasefire plan which would see the exchange of Israeli hostages captured in the attacks on October the 7th. The deal, devised by Egypt and Qatar, would also see the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from the enclave. It comes as the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza releases new death toll figures, suggesting over 27,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the attack, whilst Israel has confirmed 31 people being held hostage by Hamas have died. Gershon Baskin, Middle East Director for the International Communities Organization and a negotiator who worked on the release of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011 and maintained a back channel between Israel and Gaza until October the 7th, joins me now. Gershon, is this a red herring? Is it a meaningful negotiation? I think a total of 136 Israelis are still being held captive by Palestinian militants in Gaza. So is there any hope of this coming to fruition?
Well, I think the difference between the press release that Hamas issued last night and the document they issued this morning that they gave to the Qataris and the Egyptians leaves some room for maneuvering. The press release last night was absolutely red lines for Israel, a non-starter, talking about an end of the war, Israeli withdrawal, an exchange of all Palestinian prisoners in Israel for the Israeli hostages in Gaza. This proposal based on what came out of the Paris summit last week of the head of the CIA, the head of the Mossad, the head of Egyptian intelligence, and the Qatari prime minister actually leaves some room for negotiation because it is divided into three phases. There is a possibility to negotiate the first phase of the release of the civilian non-military hostages from Gaza, those who are alive because they want to leave the dead bodies until the end. Without Israel necessarily having to declare an end to the war. Hamas is demanding, though, the release of at least 500 Palestinian prisoners who are serving life sentences for murdering Israelis and another 1,000 prisoners in the first stage of this deal.
So how difficult a situation is Benjamin Netanyahu in now? Has he left himself scope to negotiate for a ceasefire?
Well, it's very difficult to tell. There's clearly an interest of Netanyahu to prolong the war, not to declare an end to the war, because his own political career is linked to the war continuing. The moment the war ends or we have an extended ceasefire, there will be the establishment of a national commission of inquiry headed by a Supreme Court judge. His own legal problems are continuing in the courts on his corruption charges, and the public mood is strongly against him and holds him directly responsibility for what happened on October 7th and everything that led up to October 7th. So I'm not so sure how anxious he is to make any kind of deal with Hamas. He wants to continue with the war effort and try and find the Hamas leadership and either capture them or kill them.
And how much would you say that this war, which has been ongoing since October the 7th, has achieved what is, I presume, the main goal, which is for Israeli citizens to be able to live in safety? When you look at the numbers killed and the sheer devastation in Gaza, do you worry about what's going to happen afterwards as much as, you might worry about the continuation of the war?
Of course, there is no military victory without a political victory. There has to be a day after scenario that gives Palestinians real hope that there will be a horizon of liberation, freedom, and dignity. And that is absent because Netanyahu and his government don't want to present any ideas. It is encouraging that people like President Biden and David Cameron have spoken about recognizing the Palestinian state. It's only 30 years late after talking about a two-state solution and only recognizing Israel. But if we want to defeat the idea of Hamas and the ideology of Hamas, Palestine needs to become real for the Palestinian people, not just an open-ended peace process that goes on forever.
You mentioned red lines at the beginning of our conversation. And of course, Israel has been emphatic about their intractability on a two-state solution. So, I mean, ultimately, if that's not on the table, is there any possibility of a ceasefire or at least peace?
Well, I think that we have to recognize that as long as the Netanyahu government is in power, there's no chance of talking about a two-state solution or peace. My assumption is that this government won't last very long as the war continues, or if it comes to a halt or an end, the government will be held to account and we will move to new elections. And according to all the polls, Netanyahu has a zero chance of winning those elections. So there is an opening chance for a negotiated agreement on a regional basis. The Israelis are very interested in moving forward with normalization and peaceful relations with Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi agreement to participate in a process that would lead to a Palestinian state is something that could encourage the Israeli people to support it.
And do you think that the Israeli people are at odds with the current government on that? Do you think that there is an appetite to find a long-term solution amongst the population as a whole?
I would say not yet. I think that the Israeli public is still suffering the trauma of October 7th, which is the biggest trauma the Jewish people have faced since the Holocaust. I think it will take a lot of time to overcome the trauma, and I think the international community is going to have to weigh in very heavily to push the Israelis to look toward ending the occupation over the Palestinian people and push the Palestinians into accepting a militarized state without an armed struggle in the future. This is what's going to be necessary. And I think it's doable because this conflict has now spilled beyond Israel and Palestine and it affects the security of the region. It affects international shipping. It affects the security of the entire globe. So countries like the UK and the United States and other European countries of the OECD are going to need to apply a lot of pressure, both on Israel and on the Palestinians.
Gershon Baskin, Middle East Director for the International Communities Organization, thank you very much for joining me.